All right, welcome. We are talking about Runebearer version 4 again. This time combat. We did a demo combat, but we never actually talked about combat. So we're going to go over it now, sort of the gist of the rules. I'm not going to read the rules to you. That would be silly, but I am going to make sure that this document is updated on the public site so that you can go grab it out of the drive folder there. This is very much inspired by the hero system combat, which is what I was playing at the time when this was written, but streamlines some pieces there for us, and gets rid of some things that were not sort of useful to us when we were playing Runebearer with hero. So anyway, time and distance scale. Every round's 3 to 5 seconds. Every hex is 2 meters. Done. I keep adding pluses because I'm starting and stopping the video. Okay, anyway. So we roll initiative. It's a d12 plus your initiative score. We get an initiative order. That initiative order stays for the rest of the combat until someone decides they want to re-roll initiative by spending one of their resources. And the 2 resources you have to spend are your inspiration. Each character has 2 at the beginning of a given adventure. And tactics, which is given by the tactics skill. You can take a half phase, roll tactics. The GM rolls against you. If you win, you get anywhere from 1 to 4 tactics points, which are then re-rolls for the entire party. Any one of those can be spent to re-roll the initiative order. That actually comes into play quite a bit. There's always some time when, that mage is going to get the spell off, and thus re-rolling initiative might allow one of your party members to sneak up above that mage and hit him before the spell goes off. Something like that, right? Or someone's about to get killed because they're stunned. Re-roll initiative. Maybe that guy gets to go first. He can unstun, something like that, right? Surprises, pretty much the same as in any fight game. You're surprised, you lose a round potentially. We're not going to worry about that. That's pretty standard. So yeah, in a given round, so the action economy in a given round is you have an action, which is effectively 2 half actions. And in reality, this is lifted from hero. We really should just change the nomenclature. It would probably be better for everybody. But you get to do 2 small things or 1 big thing, pretty much. And so you can see what actions and half actions look like, right? Drawing a weapon is a half action. Standing up is a half action. Making a tactics check is a half action. Attacking your opponent is a half action, but it is the last action taken. It will end your turn. Rummaging through your pack's a full action. Opening a door that's stuck is a full action. Loading a crossbow, full action, right? So some things take your entire action. Some things take up half of your action. You can move up to half of your movement, rounded up, as a half action. But you can't do that twice. You can only do that, right? So, so that's sort of the idea. You can, of course, save your action and drop in the initiative order, like in, say, a D20. So, Runebearer is very much a positional game, strangely enough. At least this version, we have versions that are less positional games and more powers-based games. But this version is very much a positional game. And what I mean by that is that, like, your facing matters, your position matters. Whether you're next to your guys or their guys is going to matter. So we have facing, right? You have to keep, right? We have to know what you're facing. And someone that approaches you from the back can be flanking you and thus do extra damage. Or do a plus to hit. And some characters can do extra damage if they flank you. You have a zone of control. And once someone enters your zone of control, they are stuck there. And they are engaged with you. Unless they have some condition which allows them to disengage. The most common condition that allows you to disengage is that an ally is in the way with you. He's also in the zone of control, allowing you to back out because the defender can't pursue you, or the attacker can't pursue you. So So what that means is, um, is that forming a line is possible, like to protect the backliners, to protect to protect the mages, to protect the archers, and so on. You can do that. You can make a zone which would be hard to get through. Now, people can get through. They can just try to ignore your zone of control, but that gives you an attack against them with a bonus, +2. So if you hear me say there's an attack as they disengage or an attack of opportunity, that's what that is. It's a free attack given to someone who is violating your zone of control and trying to run through or disengage from your zone of control. If you leave someone's zone of control, they can attack you. If you try to run through someone's zone of control, they can attack you. You're allowed to shift one hex any one round, but it does tend to form lines, I suppose. The combats do often tend to form lines. Now, that not all combats. Sometimes it's a mass, like, crazy chaos thing. But, in the fight with the Goblin, the Exile, the enemy formed a line. The party could not get through that line until they started breaking down some of those guys, pushing them back, killing them, whatever. The other reason why I call it a positional game. So here we go. We'll talk about combat resolution here, and then talk about how that plays into this positional idea. And it's a design choice to have these restrictions on movement. Even though it can tend to make combat a little more static. But that is actually a choice that to make to sort of allow this position game to take place. So figuring out how you want to engage that enemy and where your guys are going to be in relation to their guys is sort of important. So let's talk about defenses. So when you're attacked, you have the option to parry with your weapon, block if you have a shield, or dodge, right? I'm sure you needed the acting that out to make sure. Let's do that again. Now, so you can parry incoming attacks. You parry with your weapon skill. You block with your specific, you have a block skill, you have actually a shield skill, you block with that. Or dodge, there is a dodge score, which is typically lower than your block score by about 2 or 3 or 4. And there's a couple reasons for that. One reason is dodge is in nobody's template. There is no one that has a template which includes dodge. And if you remember, if a skill's in your template, you get a +2. So your weapon skill might be in your template. And thus you might, I have a 10, but I actually get a +2 because it's my template, so I have a 12. Your dodge isn't going to be that, so you might have an 8, and that's a crappy dodge. You don't want to be dodging in most fights. These attacks, you can only parry certain attacks with certain defenses. So you can block, you can parry weapon attacks typically. You can block weapon attacks, but also missile attacks. You can only dodge spell attacks. And characters with no shield can only dodge missile attacks. So that gives shield users, that gives sword and board a distinct advantage over just wielding a two-handed weapon and doing as much damage as you possibly can, because that would be the way to go otherwise. The other thing is, and I think this is sort of the one of the features of the game that, again, starts to make it positional. Your defenses degrade each time you use them. Now, this is a little bit of bookkeeping. People have to remember how many times, like what's happened, but it's not 50. You're not getting attacked 50 times. You're getting attacked 3 times around, maybe. Every time you parry, your parry drops by 3. Every time you block, your block drops by 3. And every time you dodge, your dodge drops by 3. Until you reach something called your base defense, which is the lowest your defenses can ever be. So, if my parry is 14, because my weapon skill is 14, and I parry the first goblin, my second parry is at 11. So the second goblin attacks me, and I only get to defend it with an 11. If I happen to have a block, which is better than 11, I could parry the first one, block the second one, and then, right? So, my parry's down to 11. My block was a 12. Now my block's a 9, and so on. And what that means is, in the game, is that getting attack by multiple enemies is amazingly dangerous. And indeed, sometimes the PCs will, and sometimes the enemies will, make the little guys attack first. They'll hold their round so that the big guy can. So they'll harass you until the big guy gets his shot, and your defenses are degraded. Now, the defenses at the beginning of the round, everything goes back, and every combat round, your defenses go back to normal, and then you degrade again. But you don't want to be ganged up on in the game. And so again, position is very important. You don't want to be the one guy who's stuck out there fighting 6 while your allies are back here stuck. They can't help you because, you know, they're somehow, you know, stuck behind a line of enemies. So again, I think position is a very big deal, and teamwork is a big deal, because you want to be next to your team. You want to help them out. There are talents and abilities which even make that more important, and so on. So hitting your opponent, it's the same as anything else, right? It is an opposed roll. My attack skill versus your defense skill, whichever one you're using. So if my attack skill is a 10 and I roll a 10, I got a 20. Your defense skill is 11. You roll an 8, 19. I hit you because I equaled or exceeded the number I needed. At that point, we do roll a hit location. That chart, I hate having charts broken up like that. And there are certain conditions under which you will have an alternate hit location. Or you can say, I want to take a headshot, and so only roll a d6. I want to take a shot high on his body, only roll a d6. There you go. So that's sort of the gist. And again, based on facing and flanking, which is sort of important, and the fact that your defenses degrade, it really is important to... And we have 8 PCs, so this makes it even more interesting, sort of. You know, simply because the fights are, you know, like 12 versus 8, or, right? You know, there's a lot of dudes on the battlefield. And so again, getting ganged up on really can be scary. If you're the one taking 3 attacks, that third attack's going to hit most of the time. So you know, it is interesting and important to support your fellow teammates. Damage is typically 2 dice. It's a strength die plus a weapon die, or a skill die plus a weapon die, and armor takes directly off the top of that damage. So if you have 2 armor value, and I roll 6 damage, you only take 4 damage. Done. The typical schlub has like 28 hit points, and the reason why 28 hit points is I figured if a weapon's doing 2d6, that is 7 points of damage, that the typical unarmored schlub will get hit for 7 points. They can only take 4 of those. And more importantly, that's a wound, because a quarter of your damage, if you take a quarter of your hit points in a single shot, that's a wound. So I figured that's a good rule of thumb. And typically, even more so, you know, I'm thinking I take that 8 points away from most non-combatants. So whereas a city guard might have 28, just a commoner might have 20. So their wound threshold's 5 points. So almost anything wounds them, and so on. So yeah, so when you get hit, you're going to take damage, right? You could be stunned, you could be knocked unconscious. Once you fall under a 50% threshold or a 75% threshold, 50% you have to roll for stunned to be stunned. If you fall below 75%, you have to roll to remain conscious. I don't like that. We need to there we go. You can also take a wound, and here's our wound table. And when you take a wound, it's either a 1 die, a 2 die, 3 die, etc. We can go up, right, for every 3 points. So if I need to do 7 points to do a wound to you, and I do 10, that's a 2 die wound. 13's a 3 die wound. 16's a 4 die wound. and I roll one die first, and if that is a 1 or a 2, it's a graze, and nothing else happens. Otherwise, I get to roll all the rest of the dice, pick the one I want. Obviously, I'm going to pick the higher ones because they're more dangerous. And you can be impaired, which is a minus to all of your actions from then on. Bleed, which means you're losing hit points. Crippled is a defense penalty and a movement penalty. Winded means you're going to fatigue faster, and so on. Shock means that we do damage, more damage to you straight through, and that shock damage can drop you pretty quick. So literally, shock is either 1, 2, or 3 extra dice that are added to the damage, and so that can be pretty crippling. That's what happened to Father Grimm. The dude hit him for minor damage, really, with his armor, but then rolled 11 points on the shock, and that immediately put Father Grimm in a critical state there, which he was nearly, he was in trouble. I don't like how this document ended up. I don't like how this document ended up with, in terms of how it landed. We'll have to fix that. The layout. Yeah, when you swap one column to two column in Word, you often get that. So I need an editor, is really what I'm saying. So, end of the round, you fatigue. Your fatigue number is based on what armor you're wearing and how much gear you're carrying. You roll a die. If you roll under your fatigue number, you're going to fatigue and give me a hit point. And you can have fatigue from the day. We call that long-term fatigue or day fatigue. That's just from you walking all day. Oh, you have 2 fatigue. Well, you start with 2 fatigue then, and you are you start down 2 hit points any fight. It's not a huge deal, but it can add up pretty quick. So that's the gist of it. We do have a bunch of maneuvers that you can do. You can charge someone to attack after a full move. You could take a penalty to your damage to get a bonus to hit. You can do the opposite. You can take a penalty to your attack and defense to do more damage. So there's a lot of sort of options that you have there. Similarly, you have options in defense. All those are just modifiers to attack and defense with an extra effect. And then there's some extra bits for range combat because you have to take into account the range is going to be a minus to hit, whether or not you're in the fray, which means in any combatant's zone of control. So even your allies, you don't want to be next to a melee fighting dude and you're trying to aim a bow. I think that's most of it. It's worked out pretty well. We've tweaked this 2 or 3 times to get here, and I think it's going pretty well so far. So I will sort of keep you, abreast of how this progresses. But I think these combat rules at the moment are pretty set in stone. So if you have any questions or any comments, please fire them to me or leave a comment on this video, and I will talk to you all later with magic. We're coming up with magic next. So, all right. Thank you. Bye-bye.